History is written by the victors. But some stories, they were never meant to be told. Buried in silence, erased from textbooks, and denied by those in power. Today, we dig them up. 3 dark truths. 3 hidden chapters. That history tried to erase. Are you ready to hear what they never wanted you to know? 1. The Jeju Massacre, when a government turned on its own people, 1948 to 1954. In 1948, as Korea was still reeling from its division, a peaceful protest erupted on Jeju Island. Locals opposed a US-backed election that would split the peninsula permanently. But instead of listening, the South Korean government labeled them traitors, communists. What followed was a nightmare. For 6 long years, government troops backed by US forces stormed the island. Villages were burned. Families slaughtered. It didn't matter if you were old, young, or just a child. If you lived on Jeju, you were a suspect. Over 30,000 civilians were killed, nearly 10% of the island's population. Some were executed in fields. Others were shot while hiding in mountain caves. Whole villages vanished in silence. And then came the silence. For decades, the massacre was erased from textbooks. Survivors were silenced. Speaking about Jeju meant prison, or worse. The truth was buried under shame and politics. It wasn't until 2003 that the South Korean president formally apologized. But justice? Recognition? For most, it came far too late. The ghosts of Jeju still linger, not just in memory, but in the silence that allowed it all to happen. 2. Operation Northwoods, America's plan to attack itself, 1962. In the early 1960s, America feared Cuba more than ever. Fidel Castro had seized power, aligned with the Soviet Union, and stood defiant just 90 miles from Florida. So the Pentagon drafted a plan, one so twisted it feels fictional. Operation Northwoods proposed staging terrorist attacks on US soil, bombings, hijackings, even killing civilians, all blamed on Cuba. The goal? Manipulate the American people into supporting an invasion. They even suggested blowing up a plane full of Americans, then faking funerals and news reports. The enemy wasn't out there, it was in the mirror. But the plan never came to life. President John F. Kennedy saw it and said no. He was horrified. Soon after, he fired the general who proposed it. The plan was buried, sealed in secret archives. For decades, no one knew. Then, in the late 1990s, the documents were declassified. The truth was out. At the height of the Cold War, some of America's top brass were ready to sacrifice their own people, all for war. 3. Agent Orange, the war that never ended, 1961 to 1971. During the Vietnam War, the US military launched a campaign called Operation Ranch Hand. Its goal? Strip the jungles bare so enemy forces had nowhere to hide. The weapon of choice, Agent Orange, a toxic chemical sprayed from the skies. More than 80 million liters rained down over Vietnam. But it didn't just kill trees. It poisoned water. It seeped into the soil. It entered the bodies of farmers, children, and soldiers alike. Soon, the effects were impossible to ignore: cancers, miscarriages, horrific birth defects. Babies born with no eyes, no limbs, twisted spines. The war ended. But the suffering didn't. For years, the US government denied responsibility. Only when American veterans began falling sick did the truth gain traction. Some were compensated. But the Vietnamese people? Forgotten. Generations later, children are still being born with deformities. The chemical war never stopped. It lives on in the blood of innocence, in a silence more toxic than the poison itself. These are not just stories from the past. They are warnings. Whispers from the shadows. That truth can be buried, but not forever. If this moved you, don't let it be forgotten again. Like, share, and follow, because more truths are waiting to be uncovered.